Well, even though Riot is in full swing trying to prepare us for the Ruination event which comes next week, at the same time they have not abandoned all the other things which are not connected to the Ruination. And so, yesterday we got a new update on Udyr's VGU. Normally I would put all of this into an episode of Rift News, but when it comes to VGU posts, people like it when we dive deep into these because they wanna see if their own opinion matches with the opinions of others. So you know what? Let's dive deep into what is happening with Udyr. Right at the beginning they talk about their previous post about Udyr, the one where they showed us the first concepts, and they mentioned that people really like those. And they mentioned that the feedback they got back from people affected the future direction of the VGU. So in other words, Riot is listening. Funnily enough, then they say that Udyr made it to the VGU because he is one of the last really outdated champions. That right there is a bold claim. Regardless, before the post goes deeper into what is happening, Riot gives us their 3 goals for the update. First of all, they want to preserve his stance changing and keep him as an auto-attack melee-focused champion. I couldn't be happier about this. Currently, Udyr is the only champion in the game who purely relies on his auto-attacks and whose abilities only affect those auto-attacks. He has no real active abilities, and that is what makes his kit unique. Secondly, when it comes to his visuals, they want to update him, but keep his shaman warrior vibes. This means that here the goal is not to reinvent him. The idea of Udyr is pretty cool, but they just want to update him. Lastly, the third goal is that in-game, they will try to bring him closer to the lore. But more on this later. So now, let's dive into the 3 individual points. First, there was the stance changing. Here, Riot Stashu explained that he's been playing Udyr for a very long time, so he is in touch with the champion's kit as well as what the community wants. Here, I quickly wanna mention that I also used to main Udyr. Way back in the day, during the times when people had to argue about what lane they wanted to go. Whenever I was forced into jungling, Udyr was my man. That's why, as you'll see from my reactions, I'm very excited about Udyr. So I'm glad to see that he is in good hands. Anyway, here they mentioned that even though Udyr's gameplay is brutally simple, and it is not for everyone, since he has recently seen play in the competitive scene, it is obvious that the kid has stood the test of time. So Riot doesn't need to update the style of the gameplay. Pure auto attacks are fine. Speaking of which, when it comes to the gameplay, here is what's going on. There are 2 things about the kit which need to be updated somehow, one more difficult than the other. The first issue is that the abilities don't have any high moments. From level 2, Udyr's kit is always the same. He is always casting low to medium important spells, and those have no jaw-dropping moments. Simply said, after level 2 he is the exact same the entire game. So later on you'll see what they wanna do with this. The other issue is the theme. Animal Shaman x Martial Artist is a cool theme, but it doesn't really connect with Runeterra. To quote Riot, what's the deal with the turtle and the monkey? He's from Freljord after all, so his stances will be tweaked to reflect that. The Ionian spirits were never meant to be his main source of power. Maybe they can be referenced somehow in the kit, but regardless, when it comes to the abilities, Udyr is going back home. So in summary, the 2 main things which will happen with his kit is giving Udyr more variance with the stances, you know, something a bit more exciting, and making his stances fit the Freljord thematically. But before we have a look at an example of what the kit may look like in the end, first there are 4 things which Riot wants to preserve in his kit. First of all, Udyr will have 4 basic abilities and no ultimate. This is simply what makes Udyr Udyr. Secondly, they don't want to give him any aimed or ranged abilities or a dash. He has to be focused on being a melee champion. Then, Udyr was always able to deal or take a lot of damage depending on his build. If you go pure AD, you can destroy people in seconds. But if you build him defensively, you can also become an unstoppable tank. This adaptability was always the key to playing Udyr. And lastly, you can max different abilities to affect his gameplay. With the current kit, the best example is Tiger or Phoenix. If you go Tiger, your ganks will be a lot deadlier, but your jungling will be a lot slower. If you go Phoenix, you can contest objectives in the jungle a lot easier, but your ganks will not be that good besides the stuns. so Riot wants to preserve that aspect of Udyr's kit as well. And these 4 points together resulted in amazing experimentations. Here Riot mentioned that they tried a lot of different kits. For example, they tried a kit where he got a permanent buff to the stance which he maxed first. Or they tried a kit where he could have 2 stances active at the same time. Or they tried a kit which actually had an ultimate which empowered his current stance. Besides these, there were many more. But over time, Riot settled on the idea of a super stance. This means that occasionally one of his stances would get briefly empowered. But the way it gets empowered is what Riot is trying to figure out. On their first try, if Udyr didn't cast a stance for several minutes, that stance would get empowered on the next use. Thematically, this kinda fit Udyr. It was the idea of a forgotten stance, but it was very clunky in-game. You were forced into not using abilities, which is exactly what you don't want to do. You want to use all your tools at all times, so clearly this wasn't working out. And this got Riot to the new iteration which they are currently trying out. In this variation, Udyr can recast one of his stances to use the super version. This second activation will have a cooldown as if it was an ultimate. It's a perfect solution to giving Udyr a high moment. And we even got a prototype video showcasing what it might look like. Here you can see that Udyr has a health bar, a mana bar and a third bar, with the third bar being the cooldown on the second activation. Though here it fills up really quickly for the purpose of testing. Anyway, notice the different stances. You can see that Tiger shoots out lightning, and when he activates it the second time he gets extra attack speed from the super version. Turtle gives him a shield and a lifesteal, and the super version heals him for every enemy around him. The bear burns the ground behind him, and the super version gives him more speed. And lastly, the Cryo Phoenix gives his next attack more range and a slow. And the super version fires a skill shot from his next attack. Though right after the video they stated that the skill shot is highly experimental. They are still at the testing point where everything can change. But notice that the animal stances changed a lot. The tiger now has lightnings just like the volibear. And the bear is on fire. This is a link to the new Freljordian stances. And thankfully it seems like they are indirectly referenced later in the post. So don't worry, we will get back to what is happening here. And then the post jumps into the visual side. From the first VGU post, Riot always liked the Mountain Brawler, the Wild Druid and the MMA Fighter. And after the community agreed with them and gave them the same feedback, they became confident in their choices. For those of you who remember the last time we talked about Udyr's VGU, Riot settled on the best ones, the knee skulls and the crotch skull. And after the feedback, we got a new round of concept arts. So this is what they came back with. So here's my opinion on these. The first one is fine. The war paint on him is fine, but it doesn't feel like the classic Freljordian tattoos. Though I like the spirit arms. I'm pretty sure those will stay. Then there is the Animal King. Here you can see that he has a lot less clothes, to kinda be more animalistic. And it seems like he has pieces of pizza dough floating around him. Honestly, I'm not really sure what these are supposed to be. Regardless, the next one is the best. By far. This simply screams Udyr. It is great and I even love the totem claws. If it was an entirely new champion and Riot could go wild, I would love it if the totem claws stayed. But because this is Udyr that we're talking about, the claws don't really fit him. But I still love them nonetheless. And lastly, then there is the Mimic. I believe the point of the name Mimic is that as he moves around, the animal spirit around him mimics his moves. That's likely what this means. And while it is fine, I think the animal arms are closer to Udyr, with the animal power actually being fused with his arms. Regardless, out of all of these, it seems like Riot agrees with me, and they also think that the Totem Claws is the best one, because right after this they expand on that one. But super quickly before we get to that, from the visual perspective there are 3 things that need to stay no matter what's happening. He is a Freljordian primal shaman. That's why the antlers around his head are great, and they make him stand apart. I absolutely agree with that, it's a very unique design. Secondly, he's a strong melee fighter channeling animal spirits, so Udyr will have a muscular body. but he won't be a bodybuilder. Also here they confirm that the totem claws had to go, because Udyr will have free space on his arm to represent the animal. This means that when he changes stances, his arms will change, but also the horns will represent the element. So for example, when he goes into the lightning stance, the antlers will start to spark, or when he goes into the fire stance, the antlers will catch on fire. Absolutely a brilliant idea. And lastly, we shouldn't forget that he is a traveling spirit walker. So even though he is a Freljordian, he still traveled around the world. So he might have a bead necklace, Ionian rope belt, and of course, his tattoos. After this, Riot talks about his hair. And here they say that the original concept made him look a bit too clean, like a fighter from a fighting game. So here they are trying to bring him back to the wild side. Also, it was pointed out that the hair are not dreadlocks. He's not a hipster that would be cautious about his hairstyle after all. From these, I have to say that the first one is fine. B is also fine, but it doesn't really feel like Udyr. C is very Udyr-like, just like D. Honestly, these two perfectly match who Udyr is, and both would work. But C is way closer to the normal Udyr, and D is a lot closer to the Spirit Walker skin. But both absolutely work. Then there is E and F, both of which are fine, but since Udyr is a wild man, I really don't think he would see a point in tying his hair. It should be as wild as it can get. Also, here Riot pointed out that the antlers will very much be part of the silhouette, so they need to be conscious about the antlers when they go for the hair design. Also, he is going to be a very hairy dude. That's a quote directly from Riot. He is a wild man after all. And of course, then we get to the tattoos. And this is what I meant when I said that Riot indirectly confirmed what kind of stances they might be using. So, what do we have here? Even from the video, it was obvious that the Phoenix was going to be themed after the Cryo Phoenix. That's why there, the Phoenix was a lot icier. It is themed after Anivia. Then there was the Tiger, which shot lightning. Now, a tiger is not really a Freljordian animal, so they will likely go for the Sabertooth that was crackling with energy, which was referenced in one of Udyr's stories. That is likely what is replacing the tiger stance. Then of course, you may have noticed that the bear was on fire. That's because the bear is being replaced by the ram, which is obviously in reference to Ornn. That's why the new bear stance, which is the ram stance now, was on fire. That's because the ram channels the power of a fiery demigod. And lastly, there is the entirely new one. A lot of people thought that perhaps this could be a mammoth, but in reality, this is one of the demigods which we already know about. This is the Iron Boar, a defensive demigod that is definitely replacing the turtle. That's the one that gave Udyr a shield, and it healed him for every enemy around him. So the turtle is being replaced by a boar. And on the left side, you can see all of those tattoos on his body. And finally, this takes us to the lore. Here they acknowledge the stories such as A Walk with the Voices and The Silence for the Damned, which in my opinion is still one of the best League of Legends stories out there. These define Udyr really well, so that's what they will stick with. There are two quotes here which we should really pay attention to. Here's the first one referencing the lore. To me, that's not a champion that needs a rework, that's a champion that just needs an update. We're not changing much of Udyr's lore, but we are diving deeper into who he is, how his mind works, how his abilities work, why he fights the way he does, and what his connection to the Freljord looks like. And then the other quote when it comes to the specific stances. But if Udyr is fighting for the Freljord, with the spirits of the Freljord at his beck and call, you wouldn't know it from his current stances. Most of his current abilities are linked to animals that sound Ionian, which sure, he spent many years training there. However, he came of age in the tundra, intensely familiar with its mystical landscape and needs, and has returned to his homeland. Isn't it time that Udyr's abilities reflected his home and his heritage? And here comes the most important part. We are exploring a few options, but the one I find most compelling is linking his abilities to those of the most powerful spirits in the north, the demigods. Volibear, Anivia, Ornn, and did you know that there were others? The lore names at least two more. Udyr wouldn't be drawing on their power directly. Silence for the Damned illustrates why it would be a bad idea. Volibear, at least, can exert control over people who tap into his power. But perhaps the animals that most closely resemble the demigods are enveloped in their spiritual energy, and can lend him his own enhanced strength. So, here they mentioned that the lore already referenced 2 more demigods besides Volibear, Anivia, and Ornn. And I'm pretty sure by this they are talking about the Seal Sister and the Iron Boar. While I don't think the Seal Sister will be utilized in his kit, unless she somehow becomes his passive. At least this confirms that the tattoo we saw before is highly likely going to be the Iron Boar, which was referenced multiple times in Tryndamere's lore. Again, that's the one he gets instead of the turtle. And this gets us to the end. There they mentioned that Udyr is still planned for 2022, and they ended the post with one final concept. And here I have to say, I know that these 2 are the exact same concept, but somehow I really don't like this one. Here he just looks way cooler. Why didn't you end the post with that one? But maybe I don't like it because he doesn't have his hairy belly.